The saloon doors swung inward on a gust of bitter wind, carrying the scent of pine and coming snow. She stood framed in the opening, small against the raw immensity of the prairie winter pressing in behind her. Dust motes danced in the single shaft of sunlight slanting through a high window, illuminating the worn planks of the floor, the scarred surfaces of tables. The room, thick with pipe smoke and the stale odor of spilled whiskey, fell into an uneasy hush, the raucous laughter dying on rough tongues. Her face was a mask of bone and shadow, eyes sunken but burning with a fierce, desperate light. A man's coat, too large and frayed at the cuffs, hung loosely on her thin frame. In one hand, she held a revolver, an old Patterson Colt, heavy and unfamiliar in her grip. It trembled slightly, betraying the fragility hidden beneath the rigid set of her jaw. Every face in the room turned towards her, hardened men, wary of intrusion, their initial amusement curdling into suspicion. She was clearly not one of the townswomen, whose hurried errands kept them confined to the boardwalk, skirts clutched against the perpetual dust and wind. Her kind, if they appeared at all, usually did so in desperation, seeking work or charity or passage elsewhere. But this was different. This had the sharp, dangerous edge of purpose. A man near the bar, tall and lean with eyes like chipped river stone, watched her with an intensity that set him apart from the others' gaping curiosity or sneering contempt. He didn't laugh. He simply observed, a stillness about him that suggested coiled readiness. She ignored them all, her gaze sweeping across the room, searching. Fear warred with a potent, visible grief in her eyes. This place, this town of Haven, felt like the end of the world, a collection of structures clinging precariously to the edge of a vast, indifferent land. It had swallowed her son. She had arrived 2 days ago, asking quiet questions, receiving only silence or veiled threats. Now silence was no longer enough. "Who killed my son?" Her voice, though strained, carried across the room, brittle and sharp like splintered ice. It was a demand, stripped bare of politeness, raw with anguish. The quiet broke. A wave of low murmurs, then snickers began to ripple through the crowd. Laughter, slow and cruel, started in the back, growing louder. It was the sound of men comfortable in their power, mocking vulnerability, mocking a woman who dared to step outside her allotted sphere, especially one armed with sorrow and a clumsy pistol. A heavy-set man at the bar, his face florid and greasy, guffawed, wiping tears from his eyes. "Killed your boy, eh? Out here, ma'am, things happen. Folks wander off, get lost. Or worse." His words were laced with a casual cruelty that turned her stomach. She flinched at the laughter, her grip tightening on the Colt, knuckles white. The tremor in her hand increased. This wasn't how she had imagined it. She had pictured righteous anger, swift justice. Instead, she felt a crushing wave of humiliation and isolation. They saw her not as a grieving mother seeking truth, but as a spectacle, a momentary diversion in their monotonous lives. The man by the bar, the one with the river stone eyes, remained silent, his expression unreadable. He leaned against the counter, arms crossed, a quiet presence in the storm of derision. He wasn't participating, wasn't encouraging, wasn't helping. Just watching, like the town itself, vast and uncaring. The laughter escalated, emboldened by her apparent weakness. One man started mimicking her, holding an imaginary gun, simpering. Despair washed over her, cold and complete. The gun felt heavy, useless. She hadn't killed a soul in her life. The thought of using it was alien, terrifying. She had come here seeking answers, demanding reckoning, but she found only walls of scorn and indifference. Her breath hitched. She couldn't stand here and be mocked while her son lay cold in the unforgiving ground, his fate unknown, unavenged. The weight of her loss, coupled with the hostility of the room, threatened to buckle her knees. She had to get out. She had to find another way. Turning slowly, keeping the Colt pointed generally forward, she backed away from the mockery, towards the doors that offered escape, but also the biting cold outside. The laughter followed her, a brutal echo in the sudden quiet of the prairie wind as the doors swung shut behind her. The wind tore at her coat, whipping strands of hair across her face. She stumbled away from the saloon, the sound of mocking laughter fading but not disappearing. It seemed to hang in the air, carried by the relentless wind, a constant reminder of her failure. She had hoped for fear, for a flicker of guilt, for anything but that raw, brutal amusement. The town of Haven seemed to shrink in size but grow in menace, a huddle of false fronts and hidden cruelties. She walked the short, dusty main street, past the general store with its barred windows, the blacksmith's forge sending plumes of smoke into the gray sky, the handful of clapboard houses looking deserted. No one met her gaze. Doors remained shut. It was as if she were a ghost, visible but utterly disconnected from the world of the living. Where could she go? She had spent her last few coins on a cheap room at the boarding house, but the landlady had looked at her with pinched suspicion after her saloon outburst. Sleep had been impossible, the wind howling like a hungry wolf, mirroring the emptiness in her own gut. She felt utterly alone, a small, fragile thing adrift in a vast, hostile landscape. Her son, 18 years old, had ridden out this way seeking work, a better life. He had sent 2 letters full of youthful optimism about the opportunities in Haven. Then, nothing. Weeks of silence. Her inquiries had led her here, to a sheriff who shrugged and mentioned unclaimed bodies sometimes found after storms or disputes. Nothing specific matching her boy. A few hushed rumors about trouble, about men who didn't like questions. She found herself on the edge of town, where the buildings gave way to scrub brush and rocky ground stretching towards distant, snow-capped peaks. The cold seeped into her bones, a physical manifestation of her desolation. Tears stung her eyes, freezing on her cheeks. She sank onto a rock, pulling the too large coat tighter around her. The gun lay heavy in her lap. What now? She had no resources, no allies, only a burning need to know. The laughter from the saloon echoed again in her mind, sharp and dehumanizing. They had stripped her bare, left her exposed and vulnerable. A shadow fell over her. She looked up, startled. It was the man from the saloon, the one with the quiet eyes. He stood a few feet away, neither approaching nor retreating, his gaze steady and unreadable. He wore simple, sturdy clothes, looked like he belonged to the land more than the town. A rifle was slung over his shoulder. He didn't speak. She didn't either. The silence stretched, broken only by the wind. There was no pity in his eyes, no mockery. Just observation. It was unsettling, yet strangely less terrifying than the town's active hostility. At least he wasn't laughing. After a long moment, he spoke, his voice low, rough like stone rubbed smooth by sand. "You won't find him in there." He gestured vaguely towards the town. His voice held no promise, no offer of help, just a simple statement of fact. "Folks in there, they keep secrets. Don't like outsiders asking." "He's my son," she said, her voice raspy. "My only child." He nodded slowly, a small, almost imperceptible movement. He seemed to understand the weight of those words in a way the others hadn't. "Hard country for a lone folk," he finally said. Another simple truth. He looked past her, towards the empty land. Storms coming. Seen the clouds gathering on the peaks. She looked up. Indeed, the sky had darkened considerably. The wind was colder, carrying the biting promise of snow. She shivered. She had nowhere to go. Back to the boarding house for one more night of fear, or out into the wilderness. Neither option offered solace. The man remained, a silent sentinel. He wasn't offering shelter, but his presence felt marginally less threatening than utter solitude. He was an outsider too, perhaps, or just someone who didn't subscribe to the town's particular brand of cruelty. She didn't know his name, didn't know anything about him, yet in this moment, his quiet presence felt like a tiny, fragile anchor in a raging sea. The wind howled, carrying the first few flakes of snow. She huddled deeper into the oversized coat, the gun cold against her thigh. The man still watched the horizon. He wasn't a savior, wasn't offering rescue. But he was there, a silent witness to her despair. The snow began to fall in earnest, thick, swirling flakes obscuring the edges of the world. The man turned from the horizon, his gaze settling on her again. "You can't stay here," he stated, not unkindly. "You'll freeze." He didn't invite her anywhere, didn't offer his hand. He simply stated a fact of survival in this land. She looked at the town, hidden now behind a veil of white, then back at him. She didn't trust easily. Grief and hardship had taught her caution. But his quietness, the absence of malice in his eyes, was a stark contrast to the sneering faces in the saloon. She hesitated, the Colt still heavy in her lap. "I have nowhere else." He seemed to consider this, his gaze sweeping over her thin form, the inadequate clothing. "There's a line shack a ways off," he said finally. "Used it myself sometimes. Shelter from the worst." He didn't say "we" or "you can come with me." He merely offered the existence of a place. It was up to her to decide if she dared follow a stranger into the wilderness. The prospect was terrifying, but staying here, exposed to the elements and the town's silent hostility, felt like a slower, colder death. "Is it far?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper against the rising wind. "A few miles. Can make it before dark. If we push." He turned, a silent invitation to follow. He didn't wait, didn't look back to see if she accepted. He simply began walking, a steady, ground-eating stride, disappearing quickly into the swirling snow. It was the most terrifying decision she had ever faced, risking the unknown with a silent stranger over the known cruelty of the town. Clutching the Colt, pushing herself up from the rock with aching muscles, she followed. She kept a distance, her eyes fixed on his retreating back, a small, determined figure trudging through the gathering storm. Survival instinct, dormant for days under the weight of grief, began to stir within her. They walked for what felt like hours, the snow deepening, the wind biting. He didn't speak, didn't offer to help her navigate the increasingly difficult terrain. It was a test, perhaps, or simply his nature. She stumbled often, her inadequate boots slipping on ice-slicked rocks hidden beneath the snow. Each fall sent a jolt of pain through her body, but she pushed herself up, refusing to lag too far behind. He never stopped, but she noticed he occasionally paused, glancing back briefly before continuing. A silent acknowledgement, perhaps, of her presence. Finally, as the light began to fade into a deep, bruised gray, he stopped. They were in a small, sheltered hollow. Tucked against a rise was a low structure built of rough-hewn logs, barely more than a hut. It looked abandoned, weathered by countless seasons. Smoke curled faintly from a small, tin chimney pipe. He had already started a fire. He pushed the door open and stepped aside, allowing her to enter first. The air inside was blessedly warm, carrying the dry, comforting smell of burning wood. A small fire crackled in a stone hearth. There was a simple cot, a rough-hewn table, and a few basic provisions, sacks of flour and beans, a pot hanging over the fire. It was Spartan, but it was shelter. He closed the door behind them, shutting out the storm. He still hadn't asked her name, nor offered his own. He simply began tending the fire, adding a few more pieces of wood. She stood by the door, uncertain, the Colt still clutched in her hand. The tension of the day, the fear, the cold, all converged, making her body tremble. He looked up then, his riverstone eyes meeting hers. "You can put that down," he said, nodding towards the gun. His tone was neutral, a simple suggestion, not a command. She hesitated, then slowly, her fingers stiff with cold and tension, she lowered the Colt. It felt strange to release it, this symbol of her desperate, futile quest. He gestured towards the fire. "Get warm." He didn't offer comfort, but his actions, bringing her here, building the fire, spoke louder than words. She moved towards the hearth, holding out her hands to the flames. The warmth spread through her chilled fingers, a small, almost forgotten sensation of relief. He began preparing a simple meal, soaking beans, adding water to the pot. He worked efficiently, silently, She watched him, a stranger who had offered her refuge when her own kind had offered only scorn. Trust was a fragile thing, easily broken, but necessity carved its own path. As he stirred the pot, he finally spoke again, his voice quiet in the small space. "My name's Silas." She looked at him, truly looked at him, seeing not just the stoic exterior but the lines of hardship etched around his eyes, the quiet competence in his movements. "Sarah," she replied. "My name is Sarah." It felt like offering a small piece of herself, a tentative step towards connection in the desolate wilderness. The snow continued to fall outside, muffling the world in white. Inside the shack, the fire cast dancing shadows, creating an illusion of safety. Silas didn't ask about her son again, didn't press her story. He simply shared his meager meal with her, the silence between them no longer empty, but filled with the quiet understanding of two souls seeking refuge from a harsh world. The town seemed impossibly far away, its cruelty momentarily held at bay. But she knew it was still out there, and her quest for answers remained, a cold knot in her stomach, even in the warmth of the fire. Silas's presence offered not a solution, but simply the chance to survive long enough to find one. The storm raged for 2 days, trapping them in the small shack. Sarah and Silas lived in close proximity, their interactions sparse, built on shared tasks and silent observation. She helped keep the fire going, rationed the food, her movements regaining a quiet purpose. He repaired a leaky section of the roof, sharpened his knife, checked on his traps outside. They were two solitary beings, bound by necessity and the weather. The silence between them was not awkward, but companionable, filled with the creaks of the old shack, the roar of the wind, the crackle of the fire. She learned to read the subtle shifts in his expression, the tension in his shoulders, his quiet focus. She felt, was observing her too, perhaps assessing her resilience. On the third morning, the storm broke. The world outside was transformed, a vast expanse of glittering white under a brilliant blue sky. The air was crisp, cold, and still. Stepping outside felt like stepping into a new, clean world, sharp and beautiful, yet still unforgiving. The town was hidden, a smudge on the distant landscape. Sarah knew she couldn't stay in the shack forever. Her purpose called her back. Silas seemed to understand this without her speaking the words. He didn't try to dissuade her. He simply packed his rifle, checked his traps, and prepared to leave. "I have to go back," she said, the words feeling inadequate. "To Haven, to find out what happened to my son." He nodded, pulling on his gloves. "They won't welcome you." "I know." She looked towards the distant town. The fear was still there, but it was overlaid with a hardened resolve. The days in the shack, the simple act of survival alongside Silas, had given her back a piece of herself she thought was lost. She was no longer just a grieving mother paralyzed by despair, but a woman who had endured the storm, literal and figurative, and emerged with a quiet strength. Silas paused, his gaze meeting hers. It was a moment of unspoken communication, acknowledging the shared time, the tentative bond forged in isolation. "It's dangerous," he said. "Men like the ones in that saloon. They break things. People." "He was my son," she repeated, the phrase now a statement of unwavering purpose, not just grief. He was silent for a moment, then nodded. "All right." He didn't try to talk her out of it. He seemed to respect her determination. "The trail will be clearer now the snow's settled." Easier walking, he started to turn away, towards the path back to the valley. Then he stopped. He looked back at her, a rare, almost imperceptible shift in his stoic demeanor. "I'll go with you," he said. It wasn't an offer, but a quiet decision. "Least, till you get close. Make sure you make it." She felt a surge of something unexpected: relief, gratitude, a hesitant flicker of hope. "Why?" she asked, voice soft. He shrugged, a movement that seemed to contain a lifetime of unspoken reasons. "This land. It's hard on folks who walk alone." It was as close to an admission of concern, of protection, as he was likely to give. She didn't press him. She simply nodded her acceptance. They set off together, walking side by side, but still with a respectful distance between them. The vastness of the snow-covered landscape seemed less daunting with his quiet presence beside her. They didn't talk about her son, or the town, or what might happen. They simply walked, the crunch of their boots on the snow the only sound in the immense silence. The tentative trust forged in the storm had solidified into a quiet partnership, built on shared resilience and unspoken understanding. She still didn't know exactly what awaited her in Haven, what truths she might uncover, but she was no longer walking into it utterly alone. The journey back was not just a return to her search, but a testament to her transformation from a woman crippled by grief and fear to one hardened by the elements and bolstered by an unexpected alliance. As they neared the outskirts of Haven, the scattered buildings reappeared, stark against the white landscape. The sight brought a fresh wave of tension. Silas stopped, his eyes scanning the area, sharp and alert. "From here," he said, his voice low. "Best you go on ahead." He didn't explain why, but she understood. His presence might draw unwanted attention too soon. "Thank you, Silas," she said genuinely. The words felt small, insufficient. He simply nodded, his gaze fixed on the town. "Be careful, Sarah." It was the most explicit sign of concern he had shown. He melted back into the landscape, disappearing behind a small rise, his rifle still slung over his shoulder. She was alone again, but not in the same way she had been before. Taking a deep breath, she walked towards the town. The snow lay thick and undisturbed on the street, masking the dust. The air was colder here, tinged with the stale scent of human habitation, with smoke, animal waste, something else, something she couldn't place. She approached the saloon first. It was quiet, midday stillness hanging heavy in the air. She pushed the doors open. The scene was much the same as before. Men scattered at tables, the bartender polishing glasses. Heads turned. Recognition flickered across their faces, followed by surprise, then a return of the old scorn, mixed with a new wariness. She wasn't shivering this time. She wasn't trembling. Her face was still gaunt, marked by grief, but her eyes held a clear, steady light that hadn't been there before. She wasn't holding the gun. She had left it back at the shack. She had found her strength elsewhere. The greasy man from before was there, sitting at a table. He snorted. "Well, look what the blizzard blew in. Thought you'd froze out there, ma'am." The laughter started again, but it was less certain this time, lacking its former brutal confidence. She ignored him. Her gaze went directly to the bartender, a man with sharp eyes and a face that saw too much. "My son," she said, her voice low but clear, carrying no trace of her former desperation. "Tell me what happened to him." The bartender's hands paused on the glass. The men around them shifted uncomfortably. The atmosphere in the room tightened, suspense replacing mockery. The laughter died completely. She stood straight, resilient, a force of nature in her own right, no longer a fragile flower wilting in the wind. She had faced the storm, the cold, the solitude, and she had survived. She would not be dismissed again. The town's secrets were buried deep, guarded by fear and complicity. But Sarah, tempered by the wilderness and her own grief, was no longer the woman who had stumbled into the saloon days ago. She had found her own silent strength, a quiet resilience that drew the attention of some and the fear of others. The path ahead was uncertain, fraught with danger, but she would not turn back. Her son's memory, and the quiet strength she had found within herself and in the unexpected companionship of a solitary man, propelled her forward. She would uncover the truth, not with a trembling gun, but with unwavering resolve, a mother's fierce determination echoing in the sudden silence of the room. The journey was far from over, but she was no longer lost. She was found, forged in the harsh crucible of loss and survival.